Okay, go ahead, Vince.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be able to talk with you today. My name is Vincent Smith, and I'm a professor at the Montana State University Department of Agricultural Economics and Economics, where I've been a faculty member since, good heavens, 1988. This morning, I want to talk with you about federal farm programs and why they are important for financial success. The real focus is on what helps you in terms of the offerings from the federal government for various forms of support and incentives for conservation. I'm going to begin by talking about the role of the federal government in terms of providing direct payments, that's checks in the mail, to the total farm revenues and net farm incomes across the country. I'm going to focus on 4 major federal programs that provide direct payments to farmers. And those 4 programs are price and income support programs, the federal crop insurance program. I'm going to briefly talk about disaster aid programs for livestock producers, and then conservation programs where farmers are paid to adopt or invest in production and equipment that reduce environmental impacts from their operations. And I'm going to end by sharing just a few takeaway messages for you. So the first stop is, the role of the federal government in terms of the direct payments made to farmers. The data I'm showing you are from USDA, and they're showing you in billions of dollars how much money has been paid to farmers in direct payments under various government programs for the farm sector over the last roughly 22 years. In most years, those direct payments are around $15 to $16 billion. They were much higher early in this period, in the early 2000s, because commodity prices for products like wheat, corn, soybeans, rice, and cotton were relatively low, and triggers for payments are typically low prices, at least for income support payments. Later on, in 2020 and 2019 and 2021, these payments surged to $25 billion, then in 2020, over $50 billion, and then back to just over about $28 billion in 2021, much less in 2022. The surges in payments at the back end were driven in 2018 and 19 by what was called the Market Facilitation Program, a set of 2 one-off programs to compensate farmers, especially in the Midwest, for low prices, particularly for hogs and soybeans. And then through payments associated with the pandemic legislation that the Trump administration and then the Biden administration passed in 2020 and 2021. Payments this year in 2022 are going to be much lower from the federal government because prices for wheat, prices for corn, prices for soybeans are very high. Another way of looking at this, which is perhaps more helpful, is to look at the impact of these payments if they're just viewed as a share of what's called net farm income and net cash income. Now, I don't want to take much time talking about these different concepts, but in general, net farm income is the money left over to the farm sector after all of its expenses have been paid. And what you can see that in some years, for example, in the early 2000s, over 40% of essentially farm profits came from through the addition of government payments. Then in the period 2010 to 2016, the number in terms of impact on net farm income was about 10%. In terms of net cash income, which is widely viewed as a better measure of whether the payments are going to be helping the farm sector meet their ongoing cash requirements, a little bit lower. The black line in this figure shows government payments as a share of total farm revenues, gross farm income from all sources. And that there, depending on the year, the range is from about 3% low, that's in 2012 to 2016, to highs of about 10%. 2020 was a very atypical year in that government payments were so large, $50 billion. And at a time that parenthetically farm income was pretty substantial. But what the message here is that government payments matter to farmers as a source of financial security and liquidity, and can account for as much as 10% of all their revenues across all of the farm sector. So those takeaways are really summarized in this slide. And I'm not going to repeat what I've just said, but the slide gives you the more exact numbers. Now, let me turn to the 4 major farm programs that generate direct payments, checks in the mail, for farm operations, individual farm operations. For crop producers, particularly for 16 major commodities, including wheat, barley, corn, soybeans, peas and lentils, crops that are important for many farmers in Montana. The Price and Income Support Program consists of 2 separate policies which a farmer has to choose between for an individual commodity. So if you're raising wheat, for example, you either pick what's called the Price Loss Coverage Program or the Agricultural Risk Coverage Program. Now, I'm going to describe those programs in more detail in a few moments. So but here I want to emphasize you've got to make a choice between these 2 programs for your corn or your wheat or your barley. Then the second major program is federal crop insurance. Now, you can insure your crops, almost any crop you're raising, and almost any variety of that crop, say organic wheat versus non-organic wheat, under the federal crop insurance program. There are policies available to you, to all of you in basically every county in the state. And I'll talk a little bit more detail about federal crop insurance. There are also livestock insurance products available. They cover basically price risk, and I'll talk very little bit about those. To learn a lot about federal crop insurance, you need to go and talk with a federal crop, let me try that again. You need to go and talk with an insurance agent. And if you want to see a major overview of the options available to you, the USDA Risk Management Agency has, on its homepage where you land, has a great website that guides farmers through A, how to find insurance agents, B, the types of policies available to them, and C, to some extent, the way that they should perhaps think about using crop insurance to reduce volatility, the difference from one year to the next in their income from specific crops or even their whole farm. The third major set of programs are the conservation programs. 2 types of programs: paid land retirement programs. Many of you may have heard of the Conservation Reserve Program, and then working lands programs, the EQIP program and the Conservation Stewardship Program. And again, I'll talk about these programs in detail later on. Then there are a sequence of 4 major in terms of scope, not very substantial in terms of total subsidies, disaster aid programs, one of which is especially important in Montana. So moving right along, if I go in the right direction, just to give you a sense of the relative importance of these programs, here are the data on subsidies paid to farmers under these different programs, in particular, the income support programs and conservation programs, and the supplementary payments through ad hoc payments. Income support, crop insurance, and conservation account for the bulk of total subsidies in most years. The exceptions are 2018, 19, 20, 21, and 22, where there were very large, initially, market facilitation payments. So if a trade war breaks out again and the government offers you some compensation, that's likely to fall under that title. The ad hoc supplemental payments, which are in yellow, are the payments, particularly in 2020, 2021, and to some extent in 22, associated with the pandemic, which were very substantial. In earlier years, those yellow blocks are very small, relatively speaking, and they are ad hoc payments for things like severe drought or flooding or severe flooding, or even earthquakes in the case of Alaska that disrupted agricultural production and had catastrophic impacts on individual farms. This slide shows the breakout between crop insurance subsidies, conservation payments, and price and income support programs. What you'll notice is that crop insurance is consistently a substantial part of total payments. Very large in 2022 because many of the payments for losses from drought and other causes of loss, flooding in the Midwest in 2021, the indemnities that are being paid out occur this year, not in the year in which the loss is assessed to occur. Conservation payments are pretty stable too. Congress has authorized for several years that between $4 and $6 billion a year be spent on the various conservation programs, paid land retirement programs, and then payments to farmers to adopt pollution mitigating, soil loss mitigating production practices. What varies most are the payments under price and income support programs. When prices are low, those payments tend to be high. When prices are high, as they are expected to be throughout 2022, those payments can shrink to being very modest indeed. On the other hand, you see sort of offsetting impacts because the total amount of support payments from these three programs really doesn't vary that much. The low is about $13 billion. That would be in 2019. The high was in 2016 at just about $18 billion. And the average runs at close to $15.5 billion a year. So you need to pay attention as new and beginning farmers and socially disadvantaged farmers to particularly all of these programs and investigate carefully with the help of the various government agencies that manage those programs, how you can use those programs to provide a little bit of more financial stability to your farm operations. So let's talk about price and income support programs. And let me just apologize by taking a sip of water to keep my mouth fresh. There are there's one major program that's managed by the USDA Farm Service Agency with two options. And you have for a given crop to pick one of those options, either price loss coverage or agricultural risk coverage. So the rest of this slide is devoted to price loss coverage. And I want to emphasize I'm giving you a 30,000 foot in the air view of these programs. And you need to sit down and talk with FSA folks in your county about how these programs actually work, and use the Farm Service Agency site in addition to understand in more detail than I've got time to cover here how these programs work. Crops covered in Montana include wheat, barley, corn under irrigation. Very few people raise soybeans. A lot of people raise barley. These are all programs for which payments are eligible here. And peas and lentils deserves to be emphasized, along with minor oil seeds like even mustard seed, canola, and so on. The way the program works for a given crop, if you choose the price loss coverage option, is that Congress has established a reference minimum price for each covered commodity. For wheat, currently that price is $5.50 a bushel. Then if the national average price over the marketing year is lower than the reference price, so it's not your price that matters, it's the national average price as reported by USDA, is lower than the reference price, you get a payment which is equal to the difference between those two numbers on each bushel of eligible production. So just to give you an example, for wheat, the reference price is $5.50. So suppose that the national average price for wheat is pretty low at $4.50. Then this program would give you $1 for each bushel of what's called your eligible production. What is that number? It's your production of your eligible production is established using historical information on the area your farm plants to that crop, say 500 acres for wheat, multiplied by the historical average level of production that you have reported for that crop, say 40 bushels. Someone who has an average yield of approved for payment of 40 bushels, and that's on 500 acres, would have 20,000 eligible bushels. So if the payment were $1 a bushel, you would get a check for $20,000 under this program. Producers of commodities where the reference price is typically, in at least some years, higher than the market price for their commodity, tend to enroll in this program. What's the other option? Well, the other option is agricultural risk coverage. Essentially, this is, with the exception of a very small number of counties, one of which is in Montana, people enroll in the county option for this program. In that option, expected revenue per acre in a county is established based on countywide historical yields and national historical average prices for the crop. If the current annual national average price multiplied by actual county yield in this year is lower than expected revenue on a per acre basis, a payment equal to the difference is made to the farmer for every acre that's viewed as eligible for a payment. Now, what is every acre eligible for a payment? What does that mean? You have an established, approved area for which the payment can be made. So let's go back to our farmer who's got an established acreage eligible for payment of, say, 500 acres. And let's suppose the expected revenue per acre for their wheat crop was established at $250. But the actual revenue per acre was calculated as $240. Then a $10 payment would be made on each eligible acre and that would be $10 times 500 or $5,000. So that gives you a sense of the difference between the two programs. It is your decision about which of these programs you sign up for, and you have to think through or have someone help you, perhaps a consultant or sitting down with an FSA person who can give you information on historical data for the county in which you're located for each crop, and think through which of these two options works best for you. Now I want to turn to the crop insurance programs. Federal crop and livestock insurance policies are widely available. They are available nationally for over 130 separate crops. So crops raising literally from alfalfa all the way to avocados. Now I know that's going from A to A, just because I couldn't think of a Z crop that you might grow. You can insure against milk production loss and low cattle and hog prices. And for cattle and hogs and for sheep, that should be in there too. You could also insure against what's called gross margins. Essentially, the revenue per animal, its price, minus estimated feed costs. I'm not going to say more about that program, except that increasingly cattle producers have started to use those sorts of products. Where do you get information on all these products? Well, the Risk Management Agency, as I mentioned, has a great webpage. You can contact private insurance agents. This program is managed through private insurance companies. And there are plenty of insurance agents you can go to who manage crop and livestock insurance in the state. RMA has a list of eligible agents by state. You've got lots of insurance options to choose between. For every crop that you can think of, yield insurance is available. Yield insurance basically pays you when your actual yields falls below the yield on a per acre basis against which you've insured. So a quick example, suppose your average yield is 40 bushels an acre. You want to insure so you get a payment if your actual yield falls below 3/4 of that, 30 bushels. And then your actual yield is only 25 bushels. On every acre, you would get an insurance check for a loss of 5 bushels an acre. At what price? At a price established by RMA for wheat early March, just before Simon. So it's not what the market is doing; it is what the crop insurance, the Risk Management Agency has determined is the expected price of the crop in the year in which you're insuring. You could choose revenue insurance, which is a per acre revenue product. Your average yield or proven yield is multiplied by the price at which your crop is expected to sell in the fall at planting time, basically at planting time. And if actual revenues defined as your actual yield multiplied by the price that exists in the month in which you're expected typically to sell the crop, as measured by USDA, if that number is lower than your insured revenue, you get a payment. There are other forms of insurance, pasture and range insurance, are very attractive to many ranchers in the state. Something you should seriously look at. It's driven by rainfall in this state. And if rainfall is short, that is, if you've got drought, you get a payment. And then this whole farm insurance. That is, you can insure against loss across a multiple of crops. That tends, in terms of your out-of-pocket costs, to be cheaper. In each of these products, there are many different coverage levels that are available. You can insure half your crop, 75% of your crop, 80% of your crop in many cases. The average subsidy rate, it works as follows. Suppose the price is the actually fair premium, the price that represents your expected loss is $10 an acre. So a full premium cost that you would be charged would be $10. Well, you don't pay that $10. The government pays on average 62% of that number, or $6.20, and you only pay $3.80. The evidence is that on average across the country, for every dollar a farmer spends on insurance coverage of this sort, you get back about $2.10, not every year, but over the long term. And so this is a program that is widely described as a risk management program for farmers, and it certainly is that. It will help reduce your losses in bad yield years. Conservation programs, there are two major types of programs: a paid land retirement program. The most important is the Conservation Reserve Program. That program is managed by the Farm Service Agency. So you work with your local Farm Service Agency folks if you want to take some of the land you own and put it into this program. Then there are what are called working lands programs. Those are managed by the NRCS, the National Resource and Conservation Service, not by the Farm Service Agency. Again, every county, or almost all counties, have an NRCS office in them, and you would work with the folks in that office if you want to apply for subsidies to adopt soil conservation, greenhouse gas emission reduction practices on a day-to-day basis. The Environmental Quality and Incentive Program works as follows. It's a cost share program, but I'll describe the CRP and the Working Lands programs in a little bit more detail. Land is bid into the program for the Conservation Reserve Program. Land is bid into the program under the long-term contract of 10 to 15 years, typically. The farmer specifies the acreage in a very, very specific way. It's this part of this field, and the annual per acre rental rate she or he would want to be paid if that land were to be taken out of production. Now, there are a lot of requirements, or I shouldn't say a lot, there are a set of requirements for how that land should be managed, but we don't have time to talk about that today. FSA is going to decide whether or not to accept or reject the bill based on the price you ask per acre to put the land into the program and the environmental benefits retiring the land is estimated to provide. That number is calculated using a formula established by FSA and data that basically is available to FSA on the characteristics of that land. The program is funded by Congress at just under $2 billion a year. So note, you don't get to decide that, yes, that land will go in this program. You get to decide whether or not you're going to apply to put that land in the program. If so, what would you need in order to not be out of pocket? That is, what are you going to lose by not farming the land? And then decide whether or not it's going to be viable for you to financially do this. The Working Lands programs are twofold. The Conservation Stewardship Program is the program under which farmers receive subsidies to adopt conservation practices. Funding is likely to be fairly substantial over the next decade for this program. The focus will be more heavily on greenhouse gas mitigating practices than in the past because of provisions that were put into the Inflation Reduction Act passed on a bilateral basis by Congress a few weeks ago. EQIP is a cost share program for improvements in the quality of your land or how you're managing your land. So, for example, tiling, watercourse fencing, under which up to 70% of the cost of the improvements is covered by the federal government for new and beginning farmers and socially disadvantaged farmers. The application process can be complex, and NRCS folks should be available to you to help you understand the application process. Both programs are managed by NRCS, and NRCS receives substantial additional funding under the Inflation Reduction Act to provide especially new beginning and socially disadvantaged farmers with technical assistance. So this is a program which is quite complicated in some ways to apply for, but is potentially quite valuable to each one of us who farms. I shouldn't say one of us, each one of you, because trust me, I'm not allowed to farm by anybody. I'm not very good at raising plants and so on. But this is a program that you should pay serious attention to, especially because NRCS should fairly quickly be able to provide you with technical assistance in your application process. Then we have the last program I want to talk about, which is Standing Disaster Aid Programs. Now, there are 4 of these programs: a livestock forage assistance program, a livestock indemnity program, for excessive livestock losses through fundamentally death, resulting from unpredictable events such as major snowstorms. A very complicated sounding program called Emergency Assistance for Livestock, Honeybees, and Farm-Raised Fish, known as ELAP, and a tree assistance program, which for many of you won't be relevant. This program is far more relevant in states like Georgia or North Carolina. Funding in total for these programs is relatively modest. On average, about $800 million a year, mainly tied, however, to the livestock forage program. And that program matters a lot for many ranchers, anybody producing cattle in this state. Payments are available on a county-wide basis. So if your county is declared eligible for a forage loss payment because explicitly only drought, then you can apply for that payment on the basis of the area planted to either planted to pasture, if drought has wrecked your pasture, or rangeland. The size of the payment is determined by what USDA has estimated is the value in a typical year of forage on either rangeland or pasture land. The estimated forage loss, which is determined by a drought index that indicates severity of the drought. More drought severity as determined by the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration through its drought index means a higher payment. And it's the obligation of the state FSA office to inform ranchers and farmers when payments under the program become available. You have to apply for that payment in the year in which it is available. It just doesn't come to you because you have cattle, let's say. You have to apply, and that's something very important for you to remember. It's a great program. It essentially is costless, and in drought years, you need to keep an eye on that prize, if you like, and up to and including just calling up your local FSA office to check whether or not a payment is available for you. So that's a very quick, what I would call Cook's tour, quick sort of visit every place we can imagine that would be important for you in these major programs. And I just want to come back and re-emphasize key takeaways. First, agricultural subsidies are an important source of revenue for many farmers. Second, the three largest sources of those subsidies are the Federal Crop Insurance Program, the Federal Price Loss Coverage and Agricultural Risk Coverage, Price and Income Support Program, and the conservation programs, which consist of land retirement, the Conservation Reserve Program, and two major working lands programs. There are others called EQIP, known as EQIP and CSP. Payments are available, excuse me, I've gone the wrong way. Access to the Federal Crop Insurance Program is through private insurance companies and their agencies. But the USDA Risk Management Agency has a useful website that guides farmers through your options. Access to price and income support programs and the Conservation Reserve Program is through the USDA Farm Service Agency. The CRP is not managed by NRCS, but working lands programs are managed by the USDA National Resource and Conservation Service. Now, I know that's a lot of information that we've gone over. This recording will be available to you for quite a long time, and hopefully you'll find the information helpful to you in at least providing you with something of a roadmap to the major farm subsidy programs that are available to you in this state and across the nation. Thanks for listening. Have a wonderful rest of your day.